you could get that money out of the tax net by banking it in a different country, you're out of luck. So you're absolutely right. From a regulatory perspective, there is no issue with somebody from Taipei turning up in New York, say at Morgan Stanley's offices, and saying, I want to open an account. There may be very good legitimate reasons for doing that. You may be worried about war with China or whatever, right? And there may be very good legitimate reasons for doing that. But avoiding taxes or minimizing your tax bill, you can't do that anymore, because the New York banker is obliged to report to the Taiwan authorities that we've got a national of your country with a $7 million account he wants to open. You may wish to know about it, right? So a lot of that international activity has become significantly curtailed. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's become incredibly regulated, right? And just be aware, for those of you that go into this business, that if you're dealing with foreign nationals, there are now significant international reporting requirements that banks have put into place, partly from pressure from the regulator, but some of them were actually starting to move in that direction anyway, because they were a bit unhappy with the quality of the money that they were getting from other parts of the world, right? I mean, the worst thing you can do as a private banker is be facilitating crime or, you know, something bad, right? I mean, as an individual, you don't want to do it. Your institution certainly doesn't want to do it. I would say that the level of paranoia about this and the degree of headache that there is now in account opening has probably gone over the limit. I don't disagree at all with the principle of the thing. I think it's absolutely right that we need to, you know, have proper checks and balances, but it is a nightmare now to open an account for people. I mean, there's literally, how many of you guys have tried to open an account with your local friendly bank recently? No, nobody? Somebody must have. When you moved to London about a year ago, did you open a bank here? You opened a bank account? How did you find the process? Pretty straightforward. They've improved a lot at the level of the you know, retail market. It's now just a simple question of proving your identity, you know, one phone bill and one utility bill, right? As a private banker, when I had a significantly wealthy individual come to me, the requirement for us now, called the KYC requirement. What does KYC stand for? Know your customer, right? Know your client. Are so huge now that I was told by my head of compliance, you need to construct a narrative for me for the first cent that this guy earned, right? And build that up to his present fortune. This particular case, the gentleman was a client from the Philippines, born in Manila, got a job at Citibank, who then posted him to Russia. And I had to get his pay slips back from, you know, the 1990s, or his statements, just to show that, because this is a colorful pattern, right? You're a Philippine national, you're born in Manila, you worked in Russia, what were you doing there? Then you go and do business school in the US, then you work for international banks, then you set up your own hedge fund. It's a complex fact pattern. And these days, the requirement is very high on the need to prove the source of that wealth when you're banking somebody. So guys, I'm trying to give you a flavor of the fact that the real world is actually very complex these days. It's getting ever more complex. Everything that you've learned here in your Masters in Finance is hugely valuable. It'll make you sound very smart. It is a bedrock. It's a framework. But don't forget about these real-life complications that do exist, okay? So I'll be chatting a lot about it. And it's important that you listen to what I say, because there are no textbooks where you will find questions to these answers. So when they turn up in the exam, if you haven't been listening very closely, then you're going to regret it. Okay, so do listen closely. And what I think what we're looking for in this exam, as I said in the beginning, is an ability to take that theory and be extremely solid on it, right? Risk, return, diversification, permanent, temporary income shocks, all of that. You need to know that code, but you also need to have some sensitivity as to how it actually applies in practice and how it goes on in the real world. Okay, let's talk about managing concentrated wealth. Look, the best way, there are many ways to become significantly wealthy. Let's talk about them. Let's think of 3 ways of becoming significantly wealthy. Okay, what's the boring way to become significantly wealthy? Yeah, it's correct, inheritance. Okay, let's talk about what you might, let's put it up there. So you inherit. You're very lucky, right? What's another relatively predictable but slow way of becoming wealthy? Yeah, but even before you get to entrepreneurship, if you work hard and save a lot, right? You accumulate, you save out of your income, right? So it's income savings, right? And you know, if you're in an average job, if you're earning per capita, if you're earning the average per capita income in the UK or the US, you know, you're not going to get there. But if you're in a highly rewarded profession, if you're a lawyer, banker, big cheese in advertising, something like that, and you're earning income and saving it and investing it wisely, there are people who, by just dint of sheer persistence in a professional or single career, can become very wealthy. What's another way of becoming incredibly wealthy? Sorry, what? Gambling through single stocks. Not very reliable, but it's possible. And I think you're onto something, right, which is single stocks, right? So if you're, give me an example of somebody who's globally known to be very wealthy through ownership of a single stock. Not a hard question. I can think of 5 people without really thinking about it. Who's the richest guy you can think of? Warren Buffett, yeah, not Bill Gates. Jeff Bezos, very good. Somebody else? Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, sorry? Who? Musk? Yeah. Yeah, Elon Musk is very wealthy. All based on single stocks that have done incredibly well, right? If you're a private banker looking for a news story, or looking for news stories that are helping you identify clients, this gets to your point, right? If you're a private banker looking for new generation of wealth, single stocks, what else do you look for? How do entrepreneurs sometimes get very rich? They own a company. What happens to that company to make them very rich overnight? It goes public, so you either IPO it or it gets taken over, bought by somebody, right? So a very important index of the quality of wealth generation in a particular market is the amount of IPOs. And let's use a shorthand for corporate activity. Let's call it M&A, right? So, you know, you were very asked me about how to get clients in private banking. Well, one very good way is to look at the headlines, right? Company IPOs, you follow them. And you call up the, people do this. It's called ambulance chasing, right? That lawyers apparently do in the US because they think that they can get a big injury claim. You look at an IPO announcement in the newspaper, and if you're a sensible private banker, or even better, if your bank has got somebody researching this for you, you will have known that this might be upcoming, subject to all of the rules on inside information, and you might have been in conversations with them already, right, about their money. Okay, so these are all ways of getting very rich. Now, if you had told Mark Zuckerberg that he needed to diversify his single stock position, right, too early, he would have lost out on a massive fortune. But unfortunately, or fortunately, the best advice that you can give somebody like a Mark Zuckerberg or a Jeff Bezos is, yes, I understand why you want to keep all your wealth in your business, but actually as a financial advisor, I have to tell you that it's a very bad idea, right? And you should really think about diversification. You can't overdo this, right? If the net result of your conversation is to convince Mark Zuckerberg that he should not create Facebook at all and go back to Harvard and finish his degree, then you've done a very bad thing. But actually, as a professional financial advisor, whenever you see a big concentrated position, the first question you're supposed to ask them is, you know, you really should do something about this, right? Even a little bit of diversification is better than having a concentrated single stock position. And sometimes this advice seems very foolish, right? So I was chatting to a Googler the other day. What's the stock price of Google? It's 1,000 something, right? And I was chatting to a Googler, a very significant chap at Google, and I was telling him, you know, I was talking about private banking and what we do, and I said, we had suggested you diversify at least a bit of your wealth. He then said, yeah, well, you would have done me a bit of a disservice. So I was curious. I said, what price did you get your stock at? And you know what he said? He said, on an adjusted basis, 20 cents. Right? Think about that. So this advice is very hard to give, right? I understand that. Don't get me wrong. It's very difficult to go to an aggressive, powerful entrepreneurial type and say, you know, you really need to diversify, right? But it is fundamentally the right advice. I think it was Mark Twain who said, if you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, you can have very few eggs, but make sure you watch them all very closely, or something like that, right? The degree of risk management that you have to do around a single stock position is a different order of magnitude when you've got a market portfolio. But, you know, it is very difficult to get a successful entrepreneur to buy into this notion of diversification, right? Because they think that they can control the risks better than you can. Yep.
Isn't it difficult as well if they have like insider information, if they kind of feel they know where the company's headed? It's very difficult to advise them up to that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. The observation was made that they think that they know where the company's headed, right?
As well as that point, don't you also have the issue of if they have shareholders?
Yeah.
Actually diversify, that kind of cannibalizes their own interest.
Yes. So you guys remember this diagram, right? So this is kind of my attempt to draw the efficient frontier. This is the capital market line. This is the risk-free rate. And according to theory, everybody should be on this line, right? But your entrepreneur will tell you, you know, you think that my risk is out here. So the guy's return is, the entrepreneur will always think that he's somewhere here, right? You will think that the entrepreneur is somewhere like this. The entrepreneur himself will think that he's somewhere over here, right? That return is getting at a significant, he or she is getting at a significantly low risk point. Let me step back. In theory, this should not be possible, right? This is the list of all available opportunities in the market combined in the most efficient way. Entrepreneurs believe that they're somewhere here, right? For part of the reason that you mentioned, they think that they can either earn a much better return than is available generally in the marketplace, or they think they can control the risks. Up to a point, that's true, right? Up to a point, that's certainly true. If you run a company, and if you're a small owner of a company, you can actually probably manage the risk better than an imperial finance graduate. And you know how to manage the risk, right? You own a mine, for example. You've done it for 20 years. You understand exactly how to deal with your unions. You understand how to get that stuff out of the ground and to ship it to the nearest port, right? I come in as an advisor and I say, look, you're much too concentrated. You're in an unstable political jurisdiction. The rules could change tomorrow. You're mining iron ore, which is a very volatile commodity. And plus, your labor union have been okay for the last 10 years, but you know what? They want more money now. They've seen your profits and they're getting quite aggressive. Please diversify, I'll say to the guy. And the answer I will get is, no, actually, you don't understand. I can earn a much higher return than the market, and I can control my risks. So go away and don't bother me. The most difficult conversation that I've had with people. Same with technology entrepreneurs. The Google guy, right? Are you kidding? I bought this stock. I was given the stock at 20 cents. It's now worth 1,600 or whatever the number is, right? Why should I have listened to you? Unfortunately, ex ante, before you knew that Google was going to be a moonshot like it turned out to be, still the best advice that you can give him or her is to diversify, right? Now, you have to take into account all those practical objections. I know the company. If I sell, my shareholders will get upset. But even notwithstanding all of that, I think there is a powerful argument that says you should diversify at least some of your idiosyncratic concentrated risk, right? On the point about your shareholders, so if you're Tim Cook, right? Who's Tim Cook? CEO of Apple. Very good, guys. Some of you know what's going on in the world. Okay, so Tim Cook, if he suddenly sells a bunch of stock tomorrow, what message does that send to Apple shareholders? Yeah, it could be. Or that he knows something. He knows something about the future course of the company. He's signaling to the market. his own belief. And in fact, there is a whole theory of investment management that says you should follow what insiders do. If they're selling, you should sell. How do you manage that? How do you manage that risk? If you're Tim Cook, you want to set up an endowment for your university or your school, right? And you want to sell some stock. How do you manage that? How do you manage the impact on the marketplace? You do it slowly, and what else do you do? You communicate. So pace and communication are critical, right? You get out there and you tell people, I've got this plan. Over the next 10 years, I have a desire to create an endowment for my university or a bequest for my children, or I've got this dream to buy this big yacht, whatever, right? But I'm going to be doing that in a systematic way. That minimizes the impact that you referred to. The other argument is very difficult to, you talk to some of these big guys and they're like, don't tell me about efficient market theory. I know my market. I can control this stock. Don't lecture me. Yep. Well, if they're rich enough, you can make it. Well, it's clearly good finance theory advice, right? So if you manage it carefully and if you communicate it clearly and you say the chief executive, Tim Cook, has a long-term plan to build up endowment of X, right? In a more diversified way. Typically what happens is that these guys will sell down less of their stock than they're continuing to get, right? So they will point out to you that actually I'm continuing to get even longer in the stock. This is in fact prudent risk management on my part. It's not that I hate the company, it's just that I have a motive of building this up. All my financial advisors are telling me that I should do that. There are other ways to manage the risk of single stock portfolios, which those of you who've taken derivatives classes will know about, right? So, often we see people with single stock positions that will do something called a cap and a collar around it, which is essentially build a option strategy around it, where there's a defined downside and a defined upside. So you buy a put and you sell a call. And then that makes that stock position the basis of a stock loan, for example. So you go to your friendly bank and you tell them, I've managed the risk of my portfolio, give me some money, put that in a diversified portfolio. And that is a very complicated but also efficient way to get some diversification, and people do that. Interestingly, some of those you don't have to report to the stock exchange. So it was a way of getting out of the reporting requirement. I didn't think it was a particularly ethical thing to be doing, because in effect you were reducing your risk in the stock, but it was certainly a strategy that people employed as a way of getting around that reporting restriction, right? Put a complicated derivative structure around a part of your holding, monetize it, put it in a diversified portfolio, and effectively you diversified. Okay? So look, those are all things you can do. You can sell down your stock, you can put a cap and a collar around it and monetize it in some way. It's not a good answer to say, oh, actually, I'm getting more diversified. So to go back to my example of an iron ore person, if they said, actually, I'm getting diversified, I'm getting a copper deposit in the next town, right? That works up to a point, but not really, right? So things like changing your production structure or diversifying internationally, they all sound plausible from a corporate strategy perspective, but from a financial markets proper diversification perspective, they don't really do the job, right? They may move you somewhat in the direction of a more efficient allocation of your wealth, but they don't really do it for you, right? The only real way to diversify out of a single exposure, stock exposure, is to sell some of it and hold something else. Preferably something very uncorrelated, right? So that you have that balance going on in your favor as well, right? It's always a good idea to have some uncorrelated assets. It improves your Sharpe ratio. We'll get into that a little bit more. But you guys should all know that, right? It's always valuable to have some uncorrelated assets in your portfolio.
Can you really put running a business or startup on the same axis?
Grow the business to actually have profit.
Yeah, no, it's a super point. Very good point. How can I equate risk and return for an unlisted business with a security, right, which has got a ready market every day? Yeah, it turns out you can. Even though it's not in a market and the price discovery is not transparent, you don't know the value of it every day, in effect, you're earning a return, an expected return, and it has some underlying volatility. So even though you may not know that price precisely, right, in effect, you're taking some risk. And you can represent your risk-return trade-off by trying to get a sense of what your expected returns are and what the volatility of those earnings are. It's very difficult, right? It's not as easy as doing it for a single stock, but actually you can do a model that says, okay, my profits or my returns, my dividends are going to be X, the variability associated with them is Y, and I can put it up somewhere on that screen, on that graph, right? It's not easy, and in unlisted securities are particularly hard to value because you don't have a market in them, but effectively you're subject to a set of risk and return parameters, whether you like it or not, right? There is you're expecting a return, and there is some variability around it. So whether you like it or not, you're subject to that.
I noticed a note for institutional investors. Let's say if you were a private investor and you were
Yeah, you can. And it's all a question of cost and benefit, right? If there's a particular reason why you don't want to sell the stock, it's illiquid or whatever, and somebody's offering you the opportunity to monetize it through a loan against a basket or putting some clever structure around it that makes it more liquid, it may be an efficient thing to do. Well, you don't want to be affected by my biases. You'll figure this out yourself. But I was never in favor of highly complex structures because they tended to be more for the benefit of the structurer than for the person buying them, right? Because they were typically laden with fees. Some of them perform a very valuable economic purpose, right? So, I mean, pools of mortgage securities, which got a terrible name in the stock market crash, were actually a very good instrument. It's just that the underlying quality of the assets was rubbish and there was too much leverage applied to them. But some basic structures have a lot of economic rationale. When it doesn't have a particular economic rationale, I tend to be rather suspicious of them. But yes, there are ways to liquefy otherwise illiquid stock pools and try and diversify the risk away from them. Similar to what I said about caps and collars on single stock positions. Right? Okay, guys, you've been very patient for 9 o'clock in the morning, and I've talked a lot, so I think you deserve a break. Do you think you deserve a break? Yes. Okay. 15 minutes. 10:35.
The way you mentioned that you manage your concentrated position when you put it into diversified securities. In terms of you take a loan out of your single stock position and you put it into diversified. So I was working in securities-based lending
right.
in JP Morgan asset management
Right.
before. So I was involved in a lot of that
Yeah.
because I was dealing with client portfolios which had concentrated stocks, and you put it into different things because you could liquidate it easily.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, if you go into a diversified position, isn't your return lesser? Like your variability is lesser than the single stock. So how would you counteract that? Is it just
No, hang on. Your return is less, but so is your variability. Right. And so what typically happens is that you get a haircut. You can only lend
75%.
something, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a restricted amount, but it's still worth doing because you've transformed that single stock variability and return into something that looks much more stable by dint of having that diversified portfolio. Right? Because that thing will have a low return, but will have less variability, and you will end up probably with a higher Sharpe ratio, which is what you want to do. Right now,
I was thinking more in terms of like hedging, so you're not
Yeah,
you're not fully hedged.
well, yeah, well, you're not fully hedged, but if you've got a collar, you know that if it goes down below say 80% of it, then you're safe.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Good. Adab.
Just need a bit of advice, please.
Yeah.
I wrote up a cover letter for hedge funds,
Yeah.
and I put in my framework.
I'm not allowed to do this, friend.
I don't have good advice for these like the credit services. I think it's a good way to
What's the carry price?
it's just like
Have you read Ray Dalio's?
yeah.
He's big on stuff. It shows that you're getting extremely thoughtful about it. I think it's pretty good. Because you've got the yeah. If I had a criticism, I would say that it's, but you know, how much time you've got. I would say it's maybe a little. What was that? Yeah. You know, if you could round that off, I don't know how much what the format is. It's just overall cover letter. This looks pretty good. I would argue maybe you could even split this. Then you can run it. More thoughtful than I've seen.
Thank you. I could do that, like put money into the things, but
So that is going to be my other thought. Then it becomes a presentation as opposed to. I don't know whether it should be in the left or in the appendix. Presentation. Say page for further details. Schematic.
and you had one guest lecturer, I think, coming and
No, I haven't figured them out yet, but I'm trying.
right. And if you succeed, like I'm doing my dissertation on ETFs,
Yeah.
like what's the trouble with the ETF market,
Yeah.
the dark side of ETFs.
Yeah.
So I would like to give you one of the lecturers if that's possible. Just ask a few questions.
As it did me when I first started teaching, but now I'm used to it. I'll ask the question.
Thank you very much.
You know what we might do is just have an informal few minutes afterwards where you can.
Thank you very much.
Good. You enjoying the course so far?
Wonderful.
I try hard. I try hard.
Your practical experience is there.
I do a lot of hand waving when it comes to the equation. I don't do back stuff.
Yeah, that's what we need actually. We've done a lot of maths. Thank you.
About the Buffett saying about the iPhone sales, etc.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't you think it's like self-contradictory? It's like he's a fan of.
Very good question. I think he's saying that overemphasizing that, that Apple is more than just an iPhone machine. That there are other things about it. Its brand, the presence. It likes brands. Everybody's got one, right? I think he's saying don't be overly focused on one metric. You may be missing the wood for the trees.
At the beginning, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
It's becoming more than the tax on capital gain.
Not becoming. In some countries, it is more.
It is more.
Yeah.
So basically, but then
main purpose was to incentivize the investments in the long-term
Yeah.
capital. But then we have a trend of like everyone's investing. Against